podcast where we put you on the map. This is Ron Costa broadcasting live from the Mappable USA studios here in Las Vegas, Nevada. And today, folks, we're going to talk about your biggest business asset. You may not even know what it is. You're going to have to listen to find out. But before we start, let's introduce Vicky Hutchmala from the World Token Market. Vicky, how are you doing today?
Doing fabulous, doing great, Ron. Another great day in Vegas. You know, it's winter, but you'd never know it here because it's so warm. You don't even need a jacket. It's great. And we have a very exciting podcast today, so I think we should get started.
Absolutely. I think we're really going to start the new year off really strong with this guest because this guy's incredible. Folks, let's meet Howard Lim. He's the founder of How Creative. Howard, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I wish it was as warm as it is in Vegas. It's a little cold here in Los Angeles.
Oh, no. That's unheard
yeah,
of.
You've been pretty cold.
Well, you're
Can't
living
go to
in
the beach or nothing.
Everybody says that Vegas is the gambling capital of the world. You're living in Los Angeles, which is just, well, I don't even know what to call it. It's just a crazy place sometimes, right?
It's crazy and fun.
Yes. And you know, there's a lot of great marketers out of Los Angeles as well. You're certainly one of them. So, you know, we met you over at an event done in Las Vegas. You did a presentation that blew the whole place off. It was great. So we have to get you on the podcast. So before we get started into the meat of the conversation here, maybe we can go a little bit about your background and learn a little bit about you.
Sure. We could go over my background. I've been in the business for 35 years, and it's evolved quite a bit. I started off for the first 10 years getting Fortune 500 companies recognized in a new digital era. We were one of the first companies to help lead a digital revolution. And so you probably heard of, like, for example, DVDs. Remember when VHS and betas were around?
Yep.
And then all of a sudden DVDs came out of nowhere. Well, we were responsible for that whole movement of that new category for Philips and MGM in the movie rental space. I should say the living room space is to take over VHS and beta with the superior quality media DVD. So we help brand that to consumers as well as what's called business to business in the consumer trades. And then we helped out Lion King position Broadway show Lion King on through Broadway shows and got that positioned for the vice president, and I think it's produced $9 billion now. And we helped out Apple, Toshiba, Xerox, HBO, Showtime. The list goes on. City of Santa Monica, LA Marathon. So I did that for 10 years. Getting bigger companies more globally known, literally influencing in the billions of dollars, and what's called brand recognition and brand awareness and brand equity. And then after that, started to work with all size companies, create a new business model, and help literally reinvent branding before branding was even known, but to be able to brand all size companies with the right DNA. And then the last 10 years, we moved even further along, and we created a new category where we literally design and build businesses. We either reposition companies or we position companies for better market share and brand equity and value. And so we've been known as the disruptors and changing literally the course of different categories and different industries of what we do. So that's a little background about what I've been doing the literally last 35 years. But the biggest wheelhouse to what we do when we develop companies is develop their brand. And that's where we're at now is the biggest wheelhouse is building big national brands from very small companies getting widely known.
So, Howard, explain to us what the difference between branding and marketing, or is that the same thing?
They're completely different. So branding there's three parts to branding. There's what's called, and there's usually three different types of strategists in these three areas of branding. And me being a whole brain thinker, I've actually mastered all three. So the first is strategy, and the brand strategist role is to look at what's the vision, the philosophy, the positioning, the brand promise that a company can bring to its consumer and get recognized for. And then you got what's called the brand implementer, which is also considered building the identity of the brand. And that means creating a single look and feel and continuity between all its touch points, every opportunity to engage a customer. And that could be the name, that could be what people call logo, I call them brand marks, tagline, websites, storefronts, banners, advertisements, the social media. So it all has one single look and feel to it that has been strategized by the brand strategist. What is that going to be, that overall positioning? And then you have what's called a brand manager, which is the people that actually manage the brand and companies that manage a brand for scalability. So let's say that, or licensing, or for that matter, just growing a company. So let's say Fox, came out with the King of the Hill, and then they wanted to create what's called brand extension of actually bringing and introducing, barbecuing products into, let's say, Target. Well, the brand manager would look for consistency to make sure it's consistent to the actual position of the brand that's been determined by the brand strategist, and also being continuity of the look and feel that has been designed by what's called, again, the person who creates the brand identity, or companies that create the brand identity. So how this all differs in marketing is that you have to first figure out who you are, what you do, and how you are unique from everybody else before you even begin to market. And that's up to the brand experts to figure out the look, feel, and positioning, and what makes you truly unique from everybody else. And then you want to be able to market that. So most people have it backwards. They forget about branding, and they move to taking an idea, a product or service information, and they start to market it without taking the biggest consideration. Well, what do we really want to stand for? What should we look like? What should be the colors of our brand? Like, let's say Pepsi, being blue and Coke being red. All these subtleties make a huge difference in positioning. So marketing is to spread the word, but you have to figure out first, what are you going to spread?
Well, that kind of narrows it down. But it appears that creating the right brand, incorporating your logo and your mission and all of that, is paramount to the success of your business, and also the ability to get out there into the public and create an equity that is very valuable to your business.
Yeah, exactly. So what happens usually, here's the problem in a space, is that branding became popular in 2010, and what happened was that it was like Inc. magazine, Times, Forbes, all the big magazines started trade publications to consumers, and B2B started to pick up, hey, branding's important. And it became such a buzzword that then you had marketing, graphic designers, advertising, social media people start to say that they do branding where they're not doing branding. They're doing what they do, which is really a segment of branding, or you could say a part of brand.
Exactly.
But really, to build a brand is a parts that make up the whole. And so it's dangerous because they're misrepresenting what they do. And then people get frustrated going, well, was that branding? No, that wasn't branding. That was graphic design or advertising or marketing or social media. And it really wasn't the complete thought and looking at from the standpoint of the holistic approach, you could say, from the big picture view. So unfortunately, you end up with what I call the Sybil effect, the fragmented brand. And then everybody starts doing their own thing. The graphic designer, the advertising, the social media people, they start doing their own thing, and it doesn't even look like a consistent brand. It looks like you're fragmented, and you're exactly right. That then impacts the value of the company because now the consumer's confused of who you are.
Right, because branding is something that is instantly recognizable, and it portrays that perception of this is a good company and this is a good product, and it's like an automatic, I'm going to deal with this company or buy this product because the brand is so powerful.
Exactly. Or the opposite occurs where it's like, I don't understand what this brand's about. I don't trust it. And so What you're talking about is, and referring to, is what's called brand equity. So brand equity is really where you have a set of assets that are actually linked to create a recall in the mind of the consumer of what you stand for. And so that means even like the use of color, like I mentioned, Coke owns red, right? And let's say Barbie owns that pink, right? Those are influencing the consumer of who's the source of that color. And you better believe it, they've trademarked those colors, by the way. So those colors are just one of the many attributes that actually send a signal to the consumer saying, what does that company stand for, and what has been my experience of that company, and then it actually creates an emotional response. Okay, and hopefully it's positive. 95% of companies have a negative connotation because they're all scrambled. Like I mentioned, they have a symbol.
That low. that low.
Yeah, it's pretty low. Because they're trying to figure out what they're doing wrong, but again, it's like they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, they don't know why.
Howard, one of the things that drives me crazy is the number of experts, marketing experts that they go out and they buy a copy of Photoshop, for example, and all of a sudden they're experts, they're marketers, they're branders, and they don't understand the whole process. But yet they come across as, they put expert on their business card, a lot of other stuff. It is so much more than just doing a Photoshop and typing out a name or something, right? And between that and adding colors, there's a whole process that goes on to make a branding campaign successful. But it also, besides being patented, like you said, it also has to be consistent, right? It's got to be consistent through everything, right?
Exactly. And what you're referring to, you're exactly right. So you're referring to what are the fundamentals that make up a great brand identity system. And so you're exactly right, where, I went to school for 8 years studying a lot in advertising and design, right, to actually get a Bachelor of Science in design. And so you got what's the distinction between a desktop publisher and a graphic designer is that a desktop publisher picks up a computer, has a software in there, but doesn't understand all the fundamentals that make up great design, whether it's color, typography, composition, lighting, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're saying, hey, I'm a graphic designer, and they're not. They're a desktop publisher. And then the difference between a graphic designer and a brand designer, which we create a whole new standard, which is a graphic designer is a certain discipline, like let's say packaging, advertising, billboards, product design, right? They usually are one-dimensional in a sense of what they specialize in. A brand designer is multidisciplinarian, meaning that he or she's had to master each of those different disciplines, being able to communicate within those medias most effectively. So you got now all this space. You get in a space. You get this. You could say you get this a lot of conflict that's happening, and a lot of confusion in the space of this defining what are the components that make up great brand identity systems to begin with, and it takes really a brand designer that has a multidisciplinary skill set in design and advertising.
Exactly. Okay, let's go a little further with that now. We deal with a lot of companies that are looking to crowdfund. They're looking to raise money, and obviously they all want to be successful. And when you look into some of these companies, they have these offering documents, and the offering documents have different categories and different parts of the whole document itself. And one of them is always marketing. There's always something that says marketing in the plan, right? But there's hardly any of them that actually say branding as a separate component of the plan. So should that be something that is added into these things? Are they missing something here?
Absolutely. So because there's so much confusion on what is branding, and marketing was more, quote unquote, known as a category in the earlier years, they put marketing, but what they don't understand, you have to first build the brand first. You put in it's like putting the horse before the cart. And then you got to look at then marketing/sales. So yes, that definitely should be a big, if not one of the biggest components when it comes to the creativity of actually building a company, is that component of branding, brand building, and brand designing. So you're absolutely correct. That's usually what's missing in these business plans and business overviews and strategies, by the way, when it comes to strategic planning.
Right.
So
okay. So
Howard,
now
what are the steps that you take if someone comes and says, "Oh, help me do this, and I need some information on how to build my brand"? How do you do it? What's the first thing you do, and how do you take them down that road?
The first thing I do, I've created a system. The first thing I do is I go and take them through an assessment. It's kind of like, it's kind of like you got to figure out, if you want to figure out where you stand with your health, you got to go to a doctor and then go through a blood panels and go through the physical and really go through all the different areas of the body, right, to figure out what's missing, what's deficient, and where you could use support, right, to be in ultimate health. So it's the same difference what I do with companies is I go through an assessment and I look at their business model. I look at what have they produced for their product or packaging, their website. What have they produced from the standpoint of their advertising? And I go through in a whole assessment and I look at where the holes are and what they didn't know. Like, for example, a lot of times they miss what's called a value proposition. You go to a website, it talks about the features of the product, but doesn't talk about the benefit to the consumer. What's a true benefit to the consumer, and even deeper yet, what is the value that distinguishes that product and service or information more uniquely from any other company out there, right? So
right.
I go through this assessment, it's an hour long, and I use Zoom because I work with companies all over the world, and I break down everything that they didn't know, what they didn't know, why they're not being able to grow their company. Now, if it's a new company, if it's a brand new company, what I do is I look at their business model and I look at their ideas and concepts and I tell them where they're going to be in their shortcoming or what's going to be an actual issue as far as being able to gain traction in the marketplace. So, again, I start with the assessment. And then the second thing that I do is I have now designed a system called SIM, S-I-M. And the first part is strategy. I usually take companies through a 3-day master blueprint to figure out their business, their brand, and their markets, and look at strategically where their misalignment is and how to create alignment to gain faster traction in a shorter period of time, or put in a DNA that's always been missing that they'll never be able to figure out, even in a course of 10 or 20 years, of how to really grow it into a leading Fortune 500 company, for example. And then, so that the first part is strategy. It's a very intense time when I really look at from the standpoint of the vision of the CEO or the founders, and then look at where they want to head and how they plan to get there, and all the parts that are missing to build that bridge. What's the gap? Then the second part is it now implement. The I stands for implementation. Now to build an entire identity system of building a strong identity that shows that they're the true leader in their space. And that could be, come up with the right name, tagline, brand mark, website, billboards, advertising on TV, social media campaigns, the list goes on. And then the M stands for management, and that is to manage the company for growth. Let's say license deals, franchising, growing the company from the standpoint from local to nationwide or global. So that's my process. Again, I call it SIM, S-I-M, and that's how we're able to grow companies very rapidly than any other traditional or conventional method of how companies usually do it.
Wow. And so how long does that usually take?
No longer than what it would take a company to go through a series of all kinds of service providers, from their strategy, business strategic planners, to marketing, to graphic designers. But now we've got a system, so they don't have to redo everything. So it's done right the first time with the right DNA, right foundation, and then the right backbone that allows them for growth. So it could be from anywhere from depending on the size of the company, from 3 months to a year. We rebranded a company that had 52 retail stores, and we rebranded all their stores in under a year.
Wow. Well, it's like Ron said, sometimes the key factor that you need in whatever it is that you're going to do is you need to have the right advisors and the right consultants and the real experts to help you to take you down that road so that, as you said, you do it right the first time and you don't have to redo it again because you didn't do it right the first time because you relied on somebody who really wasn't expertise in that area.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's like that old saying, where people want to be, penny wise and dollars foolish. But the problem is that with people that don't hire the right experts in their industries or in their fields or in their categories, what happens is if you're like a football field, if you're trying to get to the end zone, you unfortunately will never get there. You'll always end up with a bunch of failures. And you won't even know why you're failing.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
Well, the S in that, the strategy component of it, Howard. How deep do you go in terms of details on something like that? Because I know a lot of people, when they talk about branding, they say, we strive for excellence in our service. And what are you going to do? You're like, we're going to mail it in? Of course not, right? But what are they actually like? How specific do these clients get, or do you point them into that specific assessment?
Well, we when it comes to the strategy session, we get into how we've done it and how we've built out and how we've gotten where companies like big Fortune 500 companies, honestly, we've actually helped them create billions of dollars. So we get into what's the truth, what is the real DNA that's needed. And we ask some really tough quality questions to get quality answers. But those quality answers really start to build the value and equity of the company from that point forward so that it doesn't have to be redone. For example, when it comes to, let's say, a brand promise, right? Brand promise is one of the elements that are needed to help position a company. A brand promise is really, what are you promising that consumer that uniquely differentiates you from all other companies? Not an easy question to answer. But what I do is I guide companies and I help literally come up with a solution. We come up with the actual statement, but we're guiding them. You could say they have the data, but it's just hidden. But it's asking the right questions to actually reveal what's been concealed. Okay? So it's just taken a lot of years to come up with a process that is consistent in the way it works as a science, right? And so a brand promise, for example, just to give you an idea what a brand promise is and how powerful a brand promise is, right? So an example would be like, when Hertz was number one in the car rental space and he just dominated. There really wasn't any other players that were out there, right? And then, here comes Avis. Avis comes around and says, well, we know we're not number one, but what can we do to promise our customers that would differentiate us from Hertz? And he said, oh, my goodness, customer service. Well, we could actually do a much better job around customer service So we're going to have the tagline, "We try harder." Okay, it wasn't that easy to come up with this, right? But the point being is that
right.
"We try harder," the tagline, is help position the company as a promise that was really understood by, an average Joe, that then it brought them to the number one space the following year. That's how powerful the brand promise is. Or let's say, FedEx, where you had the competition was the post office. And as everybody has experienced at some point, they don't deliver, your delivery system is not as proficient or as efficient as it could be. So sometimes you might get a piece of important mail maybe a week later, even though you're, 100 miles away. So FedEx said, hey, you know what? We know that our target market are businessmen and women that really need to have documents been signed or something that's critical, that's time sensitive. So we're going to say absolutely positively guaranteed overnight. That was their brand promise, okay? So that's the power behind a brand promise. Every company should have a brand promise if they really want to resonate with their target market, define and differentiate from their competition, and cut through all the clutter of noise that's out there.
Okay, all right. Now, we just talked about, successful branding. What happens when you have a branding strategy session and you've got it all down on paper and you think it's the right way to go, and for whatever reason it's implemented badly and the branding doesn't work, or you get a bad review on Yelp or something like that? Something happens where your brand is not communicated to your customer. Well, what happens then? I mean, can you rebrand, or are you done?
No, you're not done. So what we do is we put a lot of business and science into what we do, not just the aesthetic side or the marketing side as far as great word or campaigns. It's really looking at, when we rebrand companies, we're taking a very logical, rational, yet creative process and solution. And so what you're referring to is the execution. So there's strategy and the execution, which I mentioned is implementation, which is building the right brand identity. And that's why I say you got to start off with quality questions to get quality answers to set down a foundation. When we do that, we have magnificent success. Okay, now the second part to this is the implementation, as you mentioned. That's 90% of building the brand. The strategy, just as important, is about 10%, but the execution is everything. Now, the only time when executions don't work right is when we find out our client has hired or someone on their team that is not the right person, not the right person for the right role on the execution side. And because execution it's everyone's business when it comes to execution. I mean, I'm talking about like middle management to the CEO to the person who's answering the phone, okay, and all the third-party vendors. And usually where a company will not execute, let's say, as efficiently or as effectively as possible is because they have one of the people or several people are in the wrong seats or the wrong role.
Okay. Yeah. And that's a problem that will doom a company for sure. It reminds me, who was the football coach that when they lost the big game, the reporter was like, what do you think of your team's execution? He says, I'm all for it.
Exactly. It's the success of any company. One of the big reasons for success for companies is having the right team. And sometimes, you know what, you got to let go of some people. And that's where I'll come in at times. And when it comes to exactly what you're saying, when it comes to execution, is to figure out, well, who's going to be supporting the execution besides our firm, but on the client side, on their side, who's going to be executing, and how much do they understand, and how much experience and knowledge do they have. So a lot of times we'll have to switch people around in companies, certain roles, or hire certain people within the organization, so then we could execute across the board.
Okay. Yeah, I have one more question before we kind of close this out a little bit. What do you say to companies that maybe don't have the the budget for severe, branding, where you look at some of these companies like Coke, Pepsi, Nike. They're in your face all the time. They pay multi-billions for advertising and to get the word out there. Some of these companies don't have a budget like that, and they look to that and say, well, how are people going to recognize my brand when I can't get it out there enough? Is there something that they can do, or some kind of strategy that they can implement?
No, you can't. That's the biggest mistake companies make. They're trying to brand themselves, or they're hiring the wrong. They're hiring the wrong service providers. So we actually have 5 different price points, and we're extremely competitive because I'm part of AIGA, and it sets up the standards and ethical guidelines for pricing. We're priced like a B-, okay, compared to our peers. But of course, the work that we do is A+. So we say we'll get the most value versus any alternative that's out there. So we based on the size of the company, whether they're a startup or whether they're $1 billion or more, and we price accordingly. And again, we're price competitive. The point being is this: it's the same process. I take companies through the same process. They still get me as a catalyst in building their strategy, implementation, and managing it, as they would be if they were a Fortune 500 company. So whether you're a startup or Fortune 500 companies, it's the same process. I take companies through in the same quality of work and the same quality team. Now, when it comes to really small companies, it may be that we don't use all the services that we provide, okay, and then we actually do it in chunks. So we say, okay, in phase 1, we're going to do this. Phase 2, we'll do this. And then when we start seeing returns, then we move to phase 3. So we do it accordingly to the client's budget, and we do it accordingly to what industry they're in, what category they're in, and what segment they're in, and who they're trying to reach. So we take in a lot of data to figure out what's the best plan that is for them, and we custom our plans.
Right, and then after that's all done, as you said earlier in the podcast, I guess a really strong brand equity, I think you used the word brand equity, is got to be worth its weight in gold for the company then, because that's something that people will think of immediately when they see the logo or hear the name or see the product, right?
Yeah, exactly. Our experience through the touch points of the sales force or the brand ambassadors, absolutely. So what happens is that when companies do it right, they're able to scale and grow their companies so much more efficiently and effectively, and so they end up saving a hell of a lot of money. So a lot of times with some of my clients, what we've done is we go, okay, we need to create a crowdfund campaign, or we need to get you with the right presentation to investors. You create the investors, and I'll show you what we need to do. So again, everything's case by case. It's a question of, do you want to be a leading brand? Do you want to be world-class? And those are the clients that we take on. They just have to say, hey, we want to be a leader, or you want to be world-class, or you want to be both. And then we'll take them on and we'll figure out what's the solution.
Do you work with startups as well, or just established, or you'll take anyone who wants to take it to that level?
No, we're working. We just picked up, literally yesterday, we just signed a contract and picked up a brand new company. So I work with believe it or not, I work with quite a few solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, and startups. It's just getting them the right DNA and the right foundation so they can experience rapid growth and not make mistakes that most make. And they reach the 20-yard line, then they're penalized because they forgot this step. So they're moved back to 10-yard line. And then they move to the 30-yard line, and they forgot to do this. So it ends up costing them a hell of a lot more time and money.
Yes.
So we just figure, hey, you know what? My motto that I invented in my second decade of business, where it's a very universal model to work with any category, any industry, any category, any segment, and no matter what size your company is, and no matter where you're at in the business cycle.
Well, those are the kind of people that listen to our podcast, Howard, so they are definitely going to be wanting to contact you. What's the best way to do that, phone or email, or what do you like?
Email is great. It's Howard at HowCreative, HOWCreative.com. And then what I'm offering, where I always start with companies, is the assessment. And then which could be found at howcreative.com/assessment. And there's a special where I usually charge $3,000 for these assessments, an hour long. They get to work with me one-on-one, and we work through Zoom, and it's $500 for a limited time. And what I end up doing is I end up working with them one-on-one, and they send me in what they want me to critique. So it could be their website, their logo, their business plan, their marketing, their products, whatever. And I'll mark up and show them how to go from good to great and what changes they should make immediately to impact their revenues. So that's a place I always start with. And then my phone number is 310-455-0389. That's my direct office line to me. So that's how I, get started with people. Is we usually have a conversation, talk about their business, see where their goals are, and understand also their obstacles, and then I could feed into that space and give them a solution.
Yeah, sometimes I wish our podcast was video because we could show the people some of the examples that you showed us at that peak performance presentation that you did. It was night and day for so many different examples. It was really, really impressive work. Wasn't that right, Vicki? You remember that, right?
Absolutely. And taking and making just minute changes or relatively small changes changed the whole outlook and impact to the company. It was incredible.
Yeah.
It was absolutely incredible. And,
you're exactly right, because it's to certain degrees. Like you could, if you're moving, like let's say from 100 miles, right, and then you change your course by 1 degree, you will not end up in the same location.
Absolutely not. Absolutely.
That's how I ended up in Vegas. I was shooting for Washington State.
Probably a good move, Ron.
Warm. You're in a warm area, warm climate, sunny skies, not bad.
Yeah. So Vicki, do you have any other? Do you have any last questions or comments before we close this out with Howard?
Well, Ron, as a matter of fact, I do. It appears from our conversation, Howard, that branding is really the foundation of a successful company, because branding incorporates your image, your vision, your logo, and all of that works together to create an emotional response as quickly as possible that then allows that company to now have a huge asset in order to market to their end user. And without branding done correctly, you never get to that success point. And you may have end users, but not as many as you could have. And it shows how important an asset branding is to a company, and more importantly, how necessary it is that all of our listeners, all of our businesses who want to do better, they need to contact you, Howard, and you need to show them how to make it happen.
Thank you. Yeah, to leave on that, you're exactly right. So, who ultimately owns the brand? The consumer.
Exactly. Exactly.
The consumer has a perception of who you are, whether you like it or not. And its question is, what kind of signal are you sending them?
Right. Because it's like, well, everybody knows what a Kleenex is, and no matter what company makes whatever tissue, every tissue is a Kleenex. That's what you want to be. Every soup is Campbell's, and that's where you want to be. You want to be where everybody thinks of your brand, no matter whose brand they're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, that was a good way to close it out. Good way to close that out, Vicki. Thank you. And Howard, thanks so much for being a guest on our show. This is our first show of the new year, by the way. So we just set a very high bar for everybody else, just so that you know.
Exactly correct.
Yeah, and Vicky, thanks for co-hosting this episode. Folks, you're listening to the Mappable USA podcast at mappableusa.com. If you go to our website, scroll down, you'll see all our syndication sources. Just pick the one you like best, subscribe, and you'll never miss another one of our episodes. If you want to be a guest on the show, like Howard was today, there's a guest tab there, fill out. We'll see what we can do about getting you on the show. And if you like what you heard today, send us an email at info@mappableusa.com. or just leave a comment on whatever page you're listening to this on right now. So thanks for your support. Thanks for listening. We'll be back at you next week with another Mappable USA podcast. Have a great week, everyone.